Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope you enjoyed your week. I've had certainly a very busy couple of weeks. Some of it better than others. There's some health issues in my family, and so those have been that's certainly a trial. But certainly it looks like we're on a path to get some of that worked out. But before I continue any further, just want you to know that the Living the Wildlife podcast is designed for professionals in the vertebrate pest field, and we deal with technical information regarding wildlife control. Now, if you're not a professional, that's okay. We welcome you as well. But just understand that we get a little geeky at times, and so we do dives into questions and ideas and concepts that are going to be off the beaten trail, because there's a lot of people out there that can certainly teach you how to set a cage trap, how to catch a raccoon, and we'll deal with some of those. But this is not primarily a how-to program, although we do some of that. We're primarily getting into a lot of research and background information for those difficult jobs and difficult cases, and try to give you information that some of you could apply in your field for those to make you stand out away from your competition. We also delve into the philosophy of wildlife control as well, and we talk somewhat about the animal rights protest industry, politics as well, and association issues. We'll delve into some of those topics as well. So we would like to consider this to be thoughtful vertebrate pest management information. So anyways, we're glad to have you here. If you like the podcast, do take a few moments, if you would, to provide a review, subscribe to the channel, and of course ring the bell so that you can be updated, or follow, so you can be updated of future podcasts. Typically, I'm publishing new material about once a week, and I have a lot of material already. If you have comments, interest in topics that you would like to see covered, by all means, you can reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And here's an example of my website, where my business is where we provide consultation services for those in the pest control world. Also, we do expert witness testimony, ghost writing. We do some photography and research as well. So perhaps you may have some technical information that you need to have looked up. By all means, reach out. And of course, we also provide training via internet, like Zoom, or we also can do training, personalized training for you or your business on site as well. All right, well, enough about me. What are we going to talk about this week? Well, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about Scat identification and the theory and principles behind Scat identification. And so let me pull up my PowerPoint here so that we can get started with that. Get on my slideshow. Okay, all right, there we are. So the question is, of course, do you know I'll let you fill in the word for yourself. So Scat identification is an important skill for anyone involved in the vertebrate pest world, because the first rule of IPM work, of course, is identify the pest. As the late great Johnny Cochran taught us, we need to make sure we avoid the rush to judgment, as I like to say. So we want to be sure that when we're doing vertebrate pest control that we are targeting the animal that's actually causing the problem. One of the analogies I give is that producers, there was some research done, I believe it was out of Purdue University out of Indiana, and they were having complaints from farmers that turkeys were damaging their crops, and a closer inspection turned out that it wasn't turkeys at all. It was actually animals that were not easily visible, such as raccoons and voles and ground squirrels such as a woodchuck and things of this nature, deer. I don't think voles necessarily were in that particular study, but nevertheless, it's easy to blame something that you see. You see an animal in the field, you have damage, therefore what you saw is what's causing the damage. And certainly that could be the case, but you want to make sure that you're not targeting the wrong animal. They could have shot a whole lot of turkeys and still had the damage. In fact, the turkeys were also feeding on insects. So it was minimal damage caused by the turkeys. In fact, the turkeys were benefiting, were in some ways helping the farmer or in being neutral to the farmer. But it was other animals that were causing the damage. And Scat, of course, can be a useful tool in identifying problems in this regard because it's often left. Now, the particular slide I'm looking for isn't here, so let me end the slideshow and start this again. There we go. Okay, now I'm in the right spot. So it may say, well, it looks the same. Well, yes, it does look the same, but it's not in the same place in the PowerPoint. So why do we not talk about tracks? Well, tracks are important. Unfortunately, in most human-impacted environments, tracks are not left behind by animals because the ground is too hard. It's really hard to get tracks of animals on concrete. Now, there are situations where perhaps the animal walked through dew and got its feet wet, or they were very muddy and they're walking across concrete. They'll leave a track, but by and large, you get the idea. It's pretty hard for tracks to be left when you're dealing with compacted soils or concrete or asphalt. So I don't really recommend people spend a great deal of time learning about tracks. I think there's a lower hanging fruit that's going to give you a bigger bang for your studying buck, so to speak, and that would be Scat. Why? Because Scat is left by animals, to be sure. It also lasts longer on the landscape than tracks. Tracks degrade relatively quickly in most circumstances, and so Scat is actually going to be left longer, and it's going to often be easier to find because it's going to last longer, of course. But if you are going to investigate tracks, perhaps we'll do a presentation on tracks or get a tracker in here on the podcast. You want to look for patterns, of course. You want to look at the location, and then you always want to think of close-up and scale. You want to look at the straddle, that's the distance. How wide are the two tracks from each other? The right foot, left foot, and also how stride that would be from, if on a four-legged animal, the distance that it covers between the tracks laid on the front feet all the way to the back feet till the next set. That would be like the stride. How far can it go for all the feet to hit the ground? So for us, it would be 1 foot to the next foot, so toe to toe. That would be our stride, the distance between that when we're walking or running, and that would also be a clue. So there's some science to it to really drill down. Now, for most of our purposes, of course, we don't need that level of precision. But as a professional, you are going to find there are going to be situations, where you're going to need to get to that level of precision. But this particular presentation today, we're just going to talk about Scat identification, some foundational principles that you probably knew already, but we're going to systematize them so that you can put them to practice or perhaps train a new employee. So what is the first step? Well, when we talk about identifying Scat, we want to be thinking about looking at the Scat, of course, itself. Now, if we're going to be doing any measurements, we need to focus on the width of the Scat is more diagnostic than the length of the Scat. So a lot of times we like to focus on the length, like, oh, well, it was 3 inches long. And that can be helpful. It's not useless information. I'm not suggesting that. But in terms of prioritization, the width of the scat is actually more indicative or more diagnostic for identifying the animal than the length of the scat. And if you don't believe me, just take some fiber for a while and you'll get an idea of how that's certainly the case. But notice that the width of the scat will not change. I'll let you think about why that is. The second element of a scat identification is to be thinking about, is it an isolated scat? In other words, is it a one dropping or one defecation incident? Or is it a toilet area? Is it an area where animals are dumping scat on a regular basis because they're either standing there and like with bats, for example, bats are going to be usually roosting above a particular spot, and of course they'll pile the droppings, or like a raccoon will frequent a location where they will drop scat, as opposed to other animals like mice, which just simply poo wherever they're comfortable pooing and moving along. So they can be quite scattered. So is the scat isolated or is it grouped? That can be another characteristic. The next question you want to ask is, are there any inclusions in the scat? Now, what we mean by inclusions are you able to see the seeds of perhaps fruit? Are you able to see any bone? Are you able to see any hair or fur? That can be very helpful in terms of identifying what the animal is eating, because different animals eat different things. Now, the challenge, of course, is today with the ubiquity of various people raising pets and what have you, when we give food to our pets, those foods are finely ground. And so if you have a raccoon, for instance, feeding on cat food or feeding on dog food, there's not going to be any inclusions in that, at least not from the food itself, because it's so finely ground. And so you may look at the scat and say, well, finely ground material, nothing inside here. This was probably someone's pet, and it turned out to be a raccoon feeding on someone's dog food, for example, right? And so this can be quite a challenge. You need to keep an open mind when you're working for clients that, you're not always going to find inclusions, but if you do, it can be very important. Now, let me do a little sidebar here. You want to be careful when you're manipulating scat. Now, what I want you to focus on is looking at scat from a distance, making sure you're not stirring things up. Like if you're dealing with the hantavirus, for example, if you're in an area where mouse droppings occur, you could be dealing with hantavirus. So you want to be careful about sweeping, stirring things up, handling scat. As I tell people, poo is bad, don't touch that. So you want to be careful in that regard. You want to think about, are you aerosolizing any of the dust or material from that scat? You certainly want to be careful of touching it with your hands and then touching your face or mouth, picking your nose, rubbing your eyes. There are going to be diseases that can be transmitted this way. And if you certainly don't want to be biting your fingernails, because many of the diseases you have to ingest, and if you ingest them, it can be quite serious when we're dealing with some parasites. So keep your wits about you when you're handling this stuff. Don't get cavalier with it. Sometimes I go crazy when I'm looking on Facebook, for example, and I see people, grabbing animal carcasses with their bare hands and they're not protecting themselves. That is absolutely crazy. Okay, don't be doing that. So nevertheless, make sure you're safe when you're handling this material. If you do need to get to a place where you think you need to be breaking open the scat, taking a knife and cutting it open, and you want to ideally do it in an area that's open air. If there's a wind blowing, you want to be sure that that wind is blowing debris away from you, like if it's perpendicular to you, so it's blowing any debris away from you, not towards you and up into your face. Wearing a face shield, wearing goggles, that would be one level of protection. Certainly you'd want to be sure you're wearing gloves, you're using tools, and then of course if you want to take it up a notch, a full-faced respirator would be ideal. Now, a HEPA filter would be more than enough. If you want to add on a vapor cartridge and that sort of thing, that would be up to you. But typically a HEPA filter, NIOSH and N95 would be enough. I'm always telling people to go N100. If 95 is good, why not go all the way, right? But nevertheless, N95 should be sufficient. The idea is you just don't want stuff going into your mouth, and you don't want to be breathing this material in as well. Now, this is out of the abundance of caution here, okay? So you just want to be careful, and I'm wanting to always err on the side of excessive caution. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that just simple manipulation of the scat with tools is not going to cause an issue where you're going to be exposed to something. But there's always an exception. You don't know if something breaks, and if you're a mouth breather like me, you might have your mouth open, and all of a sudden something's in your mouth. That's a bad place to be. So be careful. The last thing, of course, you want to be considering is context, and that is location. Where were the droppings found? Different animals are going to be found in different areas. You're not going to find muskrat scat in the middle of a desert, right? So it's just not going to happen because muskrats are a water animal. So nevertheless, you get the idea. So you want to think about what animal behavior is going to, or clues are going to tell you what animal left that scat in that particular location. And if you can, sometimes the client can be helpful about approximately when was the scat left. Was it left at night? Was it left during the day? Even, or if they can be more specific, all the better. But any type of information like that can be helpful in helping you narrow down to the species. And if not the species, you can maybe get to the class of animals or the genus of the animal. The next thing you want to look at, of course, is we're going to get drilled down to the structure of the scat itself. And that is, you want to look at the shape. Now, what I have here is basically a cheat sheet for how to identify scat by its structure. Now, it's not perfect. This is a helpful tool to put you on the path. And one of the things it does for us, though, is it helps us use labeling and terminology when we're describing the scat that we're looking at, right? Is it a sphere? Is it a pellet? Is it a bullet? Is it a rope? Is it a tube? Does it have white in it? And then, of course, is it a plop? Just an amorphous mob of material in front of it, glob of material in front of you. And you can see that this is some general rules of what you're going to be looking at. And so it's very easy to look at deer scat, for instance, and think, boy, that kind of looks like a pellet. You kind of have to look a little closer at it to see that flat zone. And it's not always there, right? So understand, ideally, you want to be looking at multiple scats to the extent that it's available. But even if you can't identify conclusively what the animal is, you can often identify what the animal is not, and that can be very helpful. Size of the scat is also going to be critical. Think of the volume of material, and again, that width. Remember, the width of the scat is going to tell you something about the size of the animal, right? So obviously, a small mouse scat is going to be much more narrower than a raccoon scat, right? So think about that size of the anus, and of course the volume of material you're getting can also be helpful in saying, is this a big animal? Is this a medium-sized animal? Is this a small animal? Is this a tiny animal? And that can be helpful in terms of narrowing it down. The beauty of doing vertebrate pest control is we don't need, as a general rule, to be as specific about what animals we're dealing with as opposed to someone who delves into insect control. Sometimes they have to know exactly what species it is because different species are going to be vulnerable to different types of control methods and others. For us, whether it's a white-tailed deer versus a mule deer, it really doesn't matter that much. Now, it may have some legal ramifications, but in terms of the majority of the control methods, it doesn't matter. Same way with a vole. You don't have to necessarily identify the scat as being with a meadow vole or a prairie vole. A vole is going to be a vole, and from our perspective, and the management practices are going to be similar for both. So it really doesn't matter all that much to determine our plan of action. The last thing, of course, want to look at those things that are droppings. Are they piled? Here we have an example of raccoon droppings on the left, bat droppings on the right. And here's an example of when we're looking at the difference between mouse and bat droppings, right? The differences can be quite stark, where mouse droppings are going to be scattered, bat droppings are going to be piled. Mouse droppings are hard when they dry. Bat droppings are soft and crumbly. Mouse droppings typically have pointed ends. Bat droppings typically have blunt ends. Bat droppings have inclusions because it's what I call fairy dust. It's the exoskeletons of the insects the bat is eating. Mice scat does not have that. So those are typically black. Now notice the only issue that I deal with color is white. I don't talk about color. People like to focus on color when we're dealing with scat. I don't like to talk much about color because color isn't really that diagnostic, except when it comes to the color white. Birds will have white scat. Snakes will have white scat. And the reason is both snakes and birds defecate and urinate out of the same hole, where other animals, of course, have a separate hole for urine and scat separate. So it's that white cap that's going to be a clue. If you see that, you know you're going to be dealing either with a snake or you're going to be dealing with a bird. And usually context will help you define it further from there. Insect scat, it's important not to get deceived by your insect scat. Notice that no mammal, no vertebrate has an anus like the hornworm scat you see there, right? Notice it looks like a pineapple grenade. That's just not going to happen with a vertebrate animal. And you also have to consider the size, like that millipede scat. Notice how small that is in comparison to the numbers on the dime there, right? Showing scale. So it's going to be important for you to make sure you're not chasing down something that was left by an insect, right? Don't get sidetracked by that. And by the way, just so you know, some fungi can have an appearance of scat as well. So you want to be thinking about fungi as another possible deceptive issue. So typically when you're dealing with fungi, you're dealing with an area that's woody and it's been overwatered. Talked about dissection before. If you're really getting down and dirty into something, maybe you're in a legal case and you're going to have to start thinking about the tools in your practices in terms of analyzing that scat. I was involved, wasn't a legal situation, but I was involved in investigating whether or not the droppings in an attic were likely left by a raccoon. And so it was sort of insurance claims at that particular time. And it was quite interesting to do that kind of work. Of course, never forget photos are an important part of doing identification. Sometimes you just aren't going to know what the scat is, and so you're going to need to be able to take quality photos. I've done some separate work in that, and I'll probably do some more work on taking photos. Those of you that have been following my podcast know that I am always talking about photos and the importance of taking quality photos, particularly if you're going to be sharing them and getting some help. Always make sure you have scale and learn how to use the functions of your camera. Talk about resources. What are the resources that I would recommend for understanding more about scat? I would suggest 2 resources here. There's certainly others that I would suggest, but these are 2 that will certainly get you started in the right direction. The first one is by Mark Elbroch. That's Elbroch. I'll be blunt with you, anything written by Mark Elbroch is worth its weight. So I would strongly and highly encourage you to read that. His material is just simply outstanding if you want high-end stuff. Another book that can be very useful if you're wanting to get started into the field, I would certainly recommend this one. It's not simplistic, I'm not suggesting that, but it gives you a frame of reference and an understanding of how to identify, interpret material, because you need to have a mindset. The fact of the matter is that the cell phone has ruined our ability to pay attention to details and to concentrate and focus. And Paul Resendez does a pretty good job in helping giving you the attitude and approach that you should have toward looking for animal sign in tracks. And so either one would be great. I would recommend ultimately that you purchase both or obtain both for your library. They could be quite helpful. Well, that's about it for me today. I'm Stephen Vantassel, wildlife control consultant. There's my book, The Wildlife Damage Inspection Handbook. It's available from my website. If you want to really drill down in terms of identification of damage of wildlife for vertebrates, that is certainly a book for you to consider. It's not cheap because it's got full color photos. It's well over 100 pages, 8.5 by 11 in size, and it's filled with a lot of very important information. It's designed to drill down and give you the clues you would need to help identify what you're looking at, because we just don't have time in this business to be wasting trying to chase down an animal that's not causing the problem. We just do not have that kind of time. The industry is too time stressed for that. We don't have the benefit often of chemicals doing the work for us when we're there. So, well, thanks for listening. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. And I would also love to hear from you. You can visit me or send me an email at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Thoughts, suggestions for new shows. Perhaps you would like to be on the show. Definitely reach out to me. We love to have guests on our program, because I think there's a lot of information out there that's not being properly transmitted to the wider community. So definitely reach out to me. Again, that's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Again, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.